The bus stopped in front of Fort Darrow before sunrise, the air still heavy with fog and the scent of rain. When Elena Carter stepped off clutching her duffel bag, no one bothered to look twice. She was small, quiet, and looked too calm for what was ahead. Her uniform looked too clean, her hands too soft. The other recruits glanced at her and immediately wrote her off. They whispered to each other that she must be some rich girl playing soldier, someone who would cry the first time a sergeant yelled at her. Elena heard them but didn't react. She just stood there still and watchful, her eyes reflecting the faint orange glow of dawn creeping over the base. Sergeant Willis marched toward the line of new recruits, barking orders that cut through the cold air like blades. Everyone stiffened, some trembling as his boots thundered past. Elena didn't flinch. When he shouted at her to sound off, she answered firmly, her voice even without hesitation. It caught his attention for half a second before he moved on, still assuming she'd break soon enough. The first drill was the 2-mile run. The road stretched up a steep hill that vanished into fog, and by the time they started, half the recruits were already regretting signing up. When the whistle blew, they sprinted like mad, desperate to impress. Elena started slow, pacing herself, staying near the back. The loud ones laughed as they passed her. But halfway up the hill, something changed. Those who started fast began to slow, gasping, stumbling. The air felt heavier, the slope steeper. That was when Elena's pace picked up. Her steps were measured, steady, relentless. She overtook one recruit after another, her breath calm while others panted and swore. When she crossed the finish line, she didn't raise her arms or smile. She just waited quietly while Sergeant Willis checked his stopwatch, frowning as if the numbers couldn't be right. She had beaten the record by 30 seconds. By breakfast, her name was already spreading through the barracks. No one could explain it. The girl who looked too fragile had just humiliated half the class. Some were curious, others irritated. Mason, the loudest and strongest recruit, made jokes about her. Said maybe she cheated, maybe she ran on coffee and miracles. Elena ignored him. She sat alone, eating in silence, eyes always alert, always distant. The obstacle course came next. It was brutal even for seasoned soldiers. Mud pits, barbed wire, climbing walls, ropes slick with rain. The ground smelled of wet dirt and sweat. Sergeant Willis gave the signal and chaos erupted. Recruits threw themselves into the mud, shouting, slipping, scraping their hands. Elena moved differently. She didn't rush. She flowed. Under the wire, through the trenches, over the wall, every motion precise, efficient. She finished before anyone else, caked in mud but breathing steady. Waiting at the end as others stumbled through, Sergeant Willis's jaw tightened. He had seen naturals before, but nothing quite like this. That night in the barracks, Mason cornered her. He dumped her duffel on the floor and demanded to know what her game was. She told him quietly that she wasn't playing one. He laughed in her face, trying to provoke her. But she never raised her voice, never even blinked. When he leaned closer, Sergeant Willis appeared behind him and ordered lights out. Mason walked away muttering, his pride wounded. Elena just picked up her bag and went back to making her bed. The next day, they moved to the live fire range. The sound of gunfire cracked across the open field like thunder. The recruits crawled through mud beneath the whine of bullets passing overhead. Some froze, too scared to move. Elena stayed low, her eyes locked forward, her arms pumping through the dirt. She made it across first again. When she saw another recruit shaking too hard to reload her rifle, Elena crawled back through the line of fire, helped the girl fix her weapon, and dragged her to safety. Sergeant Willis saw it all and didn't say a word, but when Elena walked past, he gave a tiny nod she didn't see. At lunch, the others started treating her differently. Torres sat beside her, asked where she had learned to move like that. Elena hesitated before saying her father was a soldier, and her brother too, but only one of them came home. The table went quiet after that. No one asked anything else. The days turned into weeks. Training got harder. Endless push-ups, 12-mile marches, tactical drills in freezing rain. Every time, Elena outlasted them all. When others groaned, she stayed silent. When they collapsed, she kept going. It wasn't pride or stubbornness, it was something deeper, something burning quiet inside her that no one could see. One morning, Colonel Hartman arrived to observe. He was a man who had trained thousands, his stare sharp enough to cut steel. He watched from a distance as Sergeant Willis ran the recruits through endurance drills, 60-pound packs, rocky terrain, and rifle assembly under stress. Mason struggled halfway through, his knees buckling. He nearly dropped out until Elena appeared beside him, taking some of his pack's weight without a word. Together they crossed the line, exhausted but standing. Hartman's eyes narrowed, not in disapproval but in recognition. Afterward, he called her aside. He asked where she had trained before this. She told him nowhere, just life. He didn't believe her, but he didn't push it. That night in his office, he opened her personnel file. It was mostly blank except for one sealed note at the bottom. Referral from Captain Daniel Carter, deceased in Kandahar. Hartman leaned back, remembering the name. Daniel Carter, the man who had thrown himself over a grenade to save his unit. He looked again at the girl's photo and saw the same fire in her eyes. The next day, he joined the drills personally. He wanted to test her. He turned training into simulated combat, rescue missions, medical emergencies, coordination under pressure. Elena didn't hesitate. She directed recruits like she'd done it all her life, calling out orders clearly, efficiently, never shouting but always in control. When one of them panicked, she didn't scold. She steadied him, told him to breathe, and pulled him back into the mission. When it ended, Hartman told Sergeant Willis that the girl wasn't just good, she was built for this. From that moment, the entire camp shifted. Even Mason followed her lead. When she spoke, people listened. When she moved, they followed. She never sought attention, but she became the standard everyone measured themselves against. Her discipline rubbed off on them all. The weather grew harsher, the drills more punishing. On one freezing morning, the recruits were ordered to hold a plank position in mud for 10 straight minutes. Most fell after 5. Elena stayed still until the last second, body trembling but eyes locked forward. When Sergeant Willis blew the whistle, she simply stood and wiped the mud from her face. He shook his head, smiling despite himself. On another day, they had to navigate the forest at night using only a compass. Rain poured in sheets, lightning flashing across the treetops. People got lost, frustrated, angry. Elena moved calmly through the storm, her compass steady, finding the checkpoints one by one. By dawn, she was already waiting at the finish line when the others stumbled in. As graduation day approached, Colonel Hartman gathered the unit. He told them that what they had endured wasn't about breaking bodies but testing minds. Then he called Elena forward. She stepped up, standing straight, her uniform crisp despite weeks of wear. He pinned a mark of distinction on her chest, saying she came as an unknown but would leave as unforgettable. The recruits erupted in applause. Even Mason cheered, clapping her on the shoulder afterward and saying she'd earned every bit of it. But when the ceremony ended, Elena didn't stay to celebrate. She walked quietly toward the flagpole at the edge of the base. The wind whipped through the trees as she looked up at the flag rippling against the sunrise. She whispered to herself, a promise kept to someone long gone. Later that night, her assignment orders arrived. She had been selected for Special Operations medic training, with the highest recommendation from the colonel himself. It was rare, almost unheard of for a recruit straight out of basic. When the transport plane arrived the next morning, every recruit was there to see her off. Mason shouted from the crowd that they had thought she was an easy recruit. She smiled faintly and told him to keep thinking that. It helped. Then she turned, boarded the plane, and disappeared into the rising light. Inside the plane, as the engines roared and the ground fell away, she finally allowed herself to exhale. She thought of her father's voice, his laughter, the medal folded in her bag. She wasn't chasing his shadow anymore. She had become her own kind of soldier. Back at Fort Darrow, the story of Elena Carter spread fast. New recruits heard about the quiet girl who had shattered every record and changed the way the base trained forever. They said she never raised her voice, never bragged, never failed. They said she proved that strength wasn't about noise or muscle. It was about silence, focus, and the will to rise when no one believes you can. Somewhere over the clouds, Elena closed her eyes and smiled, the hum of the engine steady beneath her. The world below was small, but her purpose was clear. She hadn't come to impress anyone. She had come to fulfill a promise, and she did. Long after she was gone, Sergeant Willis kept her name on the training board next to the record times she'd set. No one ever broke them. Whenever a new class arrived, he would glance at that name and tell them that once, a quiet recruit had walked through those gates and reminded everyone what true strength looks like. Not loud, not proud, just unstoppable.